We thought the best way to kickstart this week full of fantastic speakers, panels, and deep dive into the business environment and climate in Delhi, and of course, the entire country, would be to kick off with a very, very open-ended town hall for all our members and external joinees. Everybody here brings on our panel an extraordinary expertise in various sectors and vast experiences is able to talk very in depth on what's happening. The only way this format works is if we get lots of hard questions from you, which are on topic. I know some of us here have excellent hair, but questions about which hair gel to use are not welcome. Questions about the economy absolutely will be there. You have a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us on Zoom. If you're joining us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, please try and use the Q&A tabs there. We will be monitoring all social media to make sure your questions are answered. I would just like to spend a couple of minutes setting a quick context. As you all know, the first quarter financial year 2021, which ends in June, numbers are in, which shows something like a 23% GDP contraction, and that is only based on the official listed company figures. Our internal estimates are that once you add the informal economy, the SMEs, and the MCA data, that is going to look more towards 32%, which pretty much puts this as the most dramatic recession since maybe the 1970s. This gives us unique challenges, particularly in Delhi, where 54% of all revenue for the government is actually in GST collections, and another 23% is directly connected to economic and business activity that happens in the state. At a national figure, already the central government has indicated that there's going to be a 2.8 lakh crore deficit of GST collections, and states will have to either do an aggressive borrowing plan, and they've given a two-tier structure for that as well. But sufficiently to say the numbers are coming in. They are pretty much as predicted, but it also then opens up the political will to make extraordinary reforms that our country needs. One could argue, and last year when we had all had this session, there was talks that, look, India is going through a slow down, but also it's so slow that it's a slow moving train wreck. The silver lining of the entire COVID-19 is that we have had some amazing reforms, whether it is faceless assessment in income tax, whether it is the new education policy, which are truly dramatic and which could only happen with a massive heavy lift of willpower. States also, all across the country, now know that they have to compete for capital, they have to compete for labor, and they can't take investment, they can't take job creation, they can't take entrepreneurs for granted. What little business is currently thriving and surviving has options, and they are picking the states that treat them with the most respect and are giving them the most options. The DIPP, the Department of Industrial Promotion of India, runs their annual ease of doing business rankings, which currently are, since last year, have been operating on a 180 point implementation. Uttar Pradesh, which was ranked 12 last year, in 2019 implemented all 180 of those points, bringing them up to rank 2 in India, right behind Andhra Pradesh. Delhi state is ranked number 12, and it has so far implemented around 79 to 80 of those points. So with 100 points to go, there is a phenomenal opportunity for the Delhi government, for Delhi state, for the LG to put in the kind of big reforms that really catapults Delhi onto the map. Delhi has always had an amazing advantage over all other states. Apart from being the political capital of the country, its airports and ports, that include the land ports, by the way, are some of the most well-connected in the world. almost all international flights first stop at Delhi and then go on to the rest of the country. It has an absolute thriving entrepreneurship culture, and it's able to draw on the strengths not only of a fantastic business ecosystem, but perhaps one of the top education ecosystems of the country. These natural advantages should catapult Delhi to a stage and has always allowed it to punch far above their weight. The joke is that all roads lead to Delhi. So, regardless of where economic activity happens in India, Delhi will always play a critical role. But as we have seen in the past 2 decades, just because a state brings with it some great natural advantages, amazing ecosystem, it doesn't mean that it can get complacent. Today, the competition for capital, for talent, is not a domestic competition, it's a global competition. Delhi does not compete with Mumbai or Ahmedabad or Hyderabad. It competes with Singapore, it competes with New York, it competes with Seoul, it competes with London. I've been very, very encouraged and enthusiastic about what the LG, our chief minister, their wide plans of transforming Delhi, which were supposed to be done in 2020, including dramatic upgrades in infrastructure, huge reforms all across the city to truly establish it as a global city, both in terms of being a cultural and tourist attraction, but also truly as a city which wants and is able to take international business. COVID-19 has presented unique challenges. But like I said, the silver lining that COVID-19 brings is that it also puts a sharp focus on how important it is to create business ecosystems, how important it is to create an attractive environment for businesses to thrive. And with that, I am very happy to move to our fantastic panel to a little bit deep dive into some of these issues. I would request the panelists, as I call upon them, if you could take 30 seconds to a minute to introduce yourselves. The trouble with having such a distinguished panel such as this is that if I were to start introducing each and every one, 2 hours would be up very quickly. So I would request if you could perhaps the 1 or 2 highlights that you think are pertinent to this framework, please do share. Firstly, would love to call all upon Mr. Kawaljeet Java, and I think he's having technical difficulties. If I could move to Mr. Abhishek Rastogi. Abhishek ji, you are considered one of the GST experts of India, if not the GST experts of India, and you also lead the indirect task force for Delhi State. What's happening with GST, and how can governments, particularly Delhi State, dig itself out of this hole? Please go ahead. And 1 or 2 line introduction first, please.
To introduce myself, I'm a partner with Ketan and have been very active on the GST front. As Aditya mentioned, I have filed about 100 writ petitions in last 3 years. And the best part about these writ petitions is that most of these are out of the box thinking. And I think the credit should go to the GST Council and to the government as well, because most of these writs have opened the Pandora box of thoughts, and the government has on various occasions come up to speed to make those changes. So while we all understand that the endeavor of the government, whether it's the state government or the federal government, is to protect the domestic industry, there have been various instances which were important, to be taken to the court, and through this judicial intervention, we were able to match the gap between the legislature and the executive. Today, what we feel is the problem is that while the intent of the government is very, very clear that in terms of a lot of things, they would want to give the benefit, or whether these are exporters, exporting service community, and protecting domestic market. When it comes to the actual work on the paper, there is always a gap between the intention, which means the legislature, and the executive. There is a gap, and that's where we fall, and that's where the businesses suffer. So I think as responsible citizens, as responsible association, it is always our endeavor to highlight the right mechanism, right path, right way and highlight this to the government, to industry, and bridge that gap between the legislature and the executive. I've been doing that personally through the judicial review. There have been a lot of instances wherein the courts have come up to say that, the intention of the law was something else, but on papers, the businesses are not getting those benefits. So I think the best thing today is to understand the need of the business, take it either through the judicial route or even through the representation, because this government actually is very, very pragmatic and understands the business issues. So from that perspective, I think we are in interesting times. And of course, all of these businesses are today having this problem of COVID-19, businesses going down and so on and so forth. But for me, I mean, I would look that as a big opportunity. There could be some bottlenecks. And if as industry experts, we could remove those bottlenecks, I think this is the great time to see these as an opportunity. And I would predominantly summarize this as a reshuffling of profits, which will happen. So a lot of companies come and say that, we are suffering losses, but I am both a chartered accountant and a lawyer. One person's loss is another person's gain. The consumption pattern may go down. So what businesses need to look right now is how to maximize their profits by keeping the cost reduced. So predominantly what will happen in the next 6 months or probably even 1 year is reshuffling of this profit will happen. Profits will move from one pocket to the other. One person's loss is another person's gain. So I think right now is the time where we need to go into a state of solitude to understand that what the businesses need are, implement those needs for my business, and take this as an opportune time to make appropriate representation either to the government or to the judicial forum. So that's how I would see this economic situation currently.
Abhishek, thank you so much for that quick introduction. And we are going to circle back. Please, would love Q&A on GST, on what's happening this. Moving on to Ms. Talishre. Talishre, you have been doing throughout COVID-19, you've been sort of our bulwark in providing us on the ground, particularly what's happening with opening up, what are the HR issues around that. One of the biggest issues that we've seen right now, and which is instrumental to Delhi's recovery, every 2 minutes we open up, every 2 minutes the cases go up. When we close down, businesses are exhausted, our citizens are exhausted, residents are exhausted. Where are you seeing this going? How are you seeing companies managing risk in whether to open, how much to open? We have some very bold claims of work from home. Many of them have come undone. We have lots of people who have bold claims of 100% work. Those have also 3-4 infections start. Love to get your perspective and 1 or 2 lines of introduction, please.
Thank you, Aditya ji. So my name is Talishre and I am a partner at TRS Law Offices. I happen to be at a very lucky juncture of both advising corporates in terms of their corporate law matters, but also doing day-to-day litigation in the various courts in the country. So in that sense, I watch business cycles, both of startups in terms of bootstrapped entrepreneurs to very established Fortune 500 corporates as well. So, coming back to the point that you said, Aditya ji, as to, we are seeing an on again, off again in terms of what is known as a COVID fatigue that seems to be taking place. And I think one of the things to consider here is that, as Abhishek ji mentioned, I think you need to look at this as an opportunity. So I was actually recalling an HR conference that happened last year under the aegis of CII, where a whole bunch of CFOs as well as CIOs, this is Chief Information Officers, spoke about how there was a need to automate things around in any establishment. And I remember one very pertinent point which Javaji had made at that point in time. He said, well, you have a choice. You can either move into the 21st century or you get dragged into it. And I think we are seeing a particular drag situation here, because those that had looked at forms of technology and adapted themselves to technology, which has been available for a number of years, for example, right? So whether it's video conferencing or working from an offsite location or just the connectivity issues, those that had already already considered it, put it as a part of their day-to-day work styles within their organizations, those were much better adapted. The others, on the other hand, COVID became an opportunity to immediately jettison themselves into a place where you had to be in the new normal. And what is the new normal? The new normal is that we will have certain amount of uncertainty going forward till the time the vaccine comes in. And even after the vaccine, there is going to be the new normal of the fact that there is much more pandemic-like situations that are being predicted because of the rate at which the world is sort of colliding. The industrial world is colliding with the natural world. So in that we see, I see companies that are moving in, organizations that are moving in towards two things, which are, frankly, I find both of them to be very heartening. One, there is a particular shift towards understanding and focusing on sustainability. So whether it is a large company looking at the fact that, you have the goals that have been set in terms of solar and other places. And that is actually very interesting for Delhi, because if you look at Delhi, then Delhi also has this, tertiary sector, which is mostly about professionals who are advising in this space. It has some very fine companies that are operating across spaces in cutting edge sustainability studies or sustainability products. The other point that I see, which is really very interesting, which I'm now beginning to see, because a lot of the times we talk about global competition, but we have to also look at the link that the government is trying to draw in. With a population like ours, do we really need to go out and look at the world, or should we first be looking at domestic consumers? But getting back to, as such, the HR issues, what I see is that there is going to be an on again, off again situation, because what happens is that in terms of COVID, it's actually been very difficult to predict, because it's a live experiment taking place, and there are people who are trying to sort out and work as to what would be the best situation to optimize one's productivity. And going forward, what would be required would be a certain amount of nimbleness. If you figure out that there is a wave that's happening, you have to be very nimble instead of saying, this is my projection, this is how it's going to work long term. So it has to move. The planning that has to take place has to be a quarter on quarter, and better still, I'm seeing other companies that are taking calls which are based month on month, and there's nothing wrong with it. Why should there always be predictability? Because in unpredictability, in chaos, sometimes what happens is productivity really churns much better. So it's really like the butter coming up when you're looking at a churn situation. So I think it's time that we embrace the unpredictability and take it forward from there, because there is a lot to be said for unpredictability. Remember, if you go back into the history of capitalism, if you go back into the history of industrialization, and whichever revolution you're talking about, there has been a lot of churn. So one of the things that I do tell organizations, and I see some very brilliant organizations do for themselves, is that they have embraced the churn. They have decided that their leaders are going to sit down, put on their thinking caps, not once a quarter, but if need be once a month or even once a week, depending on where situation is, because capital, especially human capital, is very important. And in that sense, deploying capital of any kind, whether financial or human, will need to be decided depending on where the situation is. So the expectation that things are going to remain the same is a difficult one. And for the next couple of quarters, I would advise that everybody should drop that. Now, where Delhi is concerned, in certain ways, they have handled it and are in a position to handle it much better in terms of where industry is concerned. Because please remember that we don't have the agrarian sector too much. We have the tertiary sector and we have the secondary sector. Now, both of these sectors, again, are those that can adapt very, very quickly to the changes that are taking place. So on the whole, I'm very optimistic, because I see this as a time where A, you can do course correction, B, you can put on your thinking hats and come up with some fantastic solutions to what were age-old problems from before. So that's my little bit, but I'd wait for questions to come in and answer them. Thank you, Aditya.
So basically, impetus for reform is there. Now is a great time to innovate, really push forward. Welcome, Vikram Bakshi. Great to see you. I am going to grab you right after this. So every year, Dr. Shankar Goenka gives us a beautiful presentation on leadership. And although this is an open town hall, it is an audience favorite. So I'll be very remiss if we didn't sort of call him up early on to sort of walk through this. And I think that'll set a great context for the entire conference going forward. Dr. Goenka, if we can please get you on screen, and we'll take you from there.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so very much. If you ask me honestly, कोरोना के टाइम पे जो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट है ना, वो लीडरशिप रोल है. सबको how one can see out of the box is what I believe is most important in today's time. So I'll just take you through a very small journey, sir. And thank you very much for inviting me. And I could see a nice smile on Talish Ray ma'am's face and Abhishek sir's face, because smile is what is I always expect from each and every audience of mine. So quickly, sir, I want to ask the audience very few small and lighter question to make everyone light, because I know a lot of Gyan is going to come out in next on this platform. So please help me to understand who is the biggest animal in jungle. If I can see on the chat box, or I don't know how.
You can please respond on the chat box of the panel.
So if you can respond on the chat box, I'll be very pleased. So I already, because this also shows how many people are actually alive on this platform. So everyone,
we have a large number of votes for elephant. large number of votes for elephant.
Okay, so the biggest element, so the biggest animal in jungle is elephant. Now, who is the tallest animal in jungle? Wow, giraffe. Yes, I could see giraffe coming in. Wonderful, wonderful. Giraffe is the tallest. Now, who is the wisest animal in jungle? Who is the wisest animal in jungle? Or who is the cleverest animal in jungle? Wow, yes, wolf is the wisest animal in jungle. My next and last question is, who is the fastest animal in jungle? Leopard, cheetah, tiger. Yes. So the cheetah. Now please help me to understand who is the king of jungle. Wow, sir, congratulations to you. So many people are alive. I'm so happy to see that at this platform, early hours on today morning, everyone is so alive. Now the king of the jungle is lion. Now my next question and food for thought for all of you guys is, कि न तो lion fast, न तो लायन सबसे बड़ा है, न बिगेस्ट है, न टॉलेस्ट है, न लॉयन वाइजेस्ट है, न लॉयन फास्टेस्ट है, फिर वो एनिमल लॉयन जंगल का किंग क्यों है? सिर्फ इसकी वजह से क्योंकि उसका एटीट्यूड जो है वो उसको लॉयन का जंगल लॉयन को किंग बनाता है. इसका my great request to all my audiences, we all need to remember that as a leader, your attitude plays an extremely great role. कि आप कैसे भी सिचुएशन में हो, लीडर ऐसा नहीं होता है कि आप उसको जंगल में छोड़ दो तो डर जाएगा. आप उसको कैसे भी स्थिति में छोड़िए, कैसे भी पोजीशन पे छोड़िए, he will play a role. Because all of us, we need to remember that life is full of choices and life is full of compromises. We need to see that how we can go to next level. इस समय सर सोसाइटी में दो तरह के लोग हैं. इस समय सोसाइटी में, आई होप आई एम ऑडिबल सर करेक्टली. सर एम आई ऑडिबल करेक्टली? इफ यू कैन जस्ट.
Yes,
ओके. सो इस समय सर सोसाइटी में दो तरह के लोग हैं. एक लोग वो हैं जब सुबह उठते हैं, दे नो कि उनका गोल क्या है, and what they do, the first thing in the morning when they get up, they know their goal and they shoot at that goal. और सोसाइटी में दूसरे तरह के लोग हैं जो रोज सुबह उठते तो हैं, गोली भी चलाते हैं, और जहां पे गोली लग गई वो अपना गोल जाकर वहां पे लगा देते हैं कि भैया यही मेरा गोल है. My message to all my great audiences, there are few people in this world who are optimistic. They can see great future. मेरी सुबह सर से बात हो रही थी, बर्लिया साहब ने कहा, you see, I can tell you, Mr. Goenka, so much things are going to happen. और कुछ लोग हैं जो डरे हुए हैं, बूझे हुए हैं, अनऑप्टिमिस्टिक है, जिनको सब कुछ अंधेरा दिखता है. Choice is your what you want to see. And my great message to all of you friends, if the plan doesn't work, change the plan, not the goal. My request, my humble request to all my audience today morning is, please and please work on your goal. क्योंकि दुनिया में 99% लोग ऐसे हैं जिनका गोल नहीं है. और मैं आपको एक बात बताना चाहता हूं, 99.9% लोग अपने फैंटेसी को अपना गोल मानते हैं. So please understand the difference between goal and fantasy. Please create your goal. And biggest message to all of you is कि जब भी हम जीवन में कोई से मिलते हैं, we always create a plan to know कि आप कौन हैं. Who are you? My request to all of you is to know yourself कि मैं कौन हूं. And that is what I do at Wow Factors. I help you to know कि मैं कौन हूं, मैं करना क्या चाहता हूं, मैं जीवन में आगे कैसा जाना चाहता हूं. क्योंकि friends, please remember, if you can't lead yourself, then you can't lead others. Please learn to lead yourself, which is very important. And my message to all of you friends, don't waste your time with explanations, because people only hear what they want to hear. So create a concrete plan for yourself so that you can go to next level. My last message to all of you friends, इंसान घर बदलता है, लिबास बदलता है, रिश्ते बदलता है, दोस्त बदलता है, फिर भी क्यों परेशान रहता है, क्यों वो खुद को नहीं बदलता. और मिर्जा गालिब ने कहा कि उम्र भर गालिब यही भूल करता रहा, धूल चेहरे पे थी और आईना साफ करता रहा. To my great audience at CII, my last message to all of you, use your influence, not your power. पता है, आप जैसे जैसे आगे होते जाएंगे, जैसे जैसे आप सीनियर होते जाएंगे, आपको लगता है मैं पावरफुल हो गया हूं. नहीं, आप इन्फ्लुएंशियल हैं. आप अपनी इन्फ्लुएंस को यूज करिए. और जो दुनिया में दो सबसे बड़े लोग हैं, they were popular because of their influence, not because of their power. They are Mother Teresa and Princess Diana. Princess Diana was not influential because she was beautiful. There are n number of women who are more beautiful than Princess Diana. She was not influential because she was princess. In spite of, there are so many princes, I'm sure many of you don't know them also. कैसे पता लगा ये influential है? ये इस बात से पता लगा कि प्रिंसेस डियाना की डेथ 31 अगस्त 1997 को हुई, और उसके एक वीक के बाद मदर टेरेसा की डेथ हुई 5 सितंबर 1997 को. जब प्रिंसेस डियाना की डेथ हुई, 2.5 बिलियन पीपल वॉच्ड हर फ्यूनरल. दिस इज द पावर ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंस. And this Delhi says 1996, who are the most caring people in the world? Number 1 was Princess Diana and number 2 was Mother Teresa. My humble request to all my great leaders at the CIA, the best forum of the country, please learn to use your influence. And what I learned in my life is कि जितने लोग ये ऊपर देख रहे हैं, ये सारे इन्फ्लुएंशियल हैं, और जितने लोग आप नीचे देख रहे हैं, ये सारे पावर में हैं. और मोदी साहब, हमारे योगी साहब ने पिछले हफ्ते कहा था, सत्ता तो विरासत में मिल सकती है, लेकिन बुद्धि विरासत में नहीं मिल सकती. इस समय जो एंटरप्रेन्योर्स हैं, जिनके बेटे बड़े हो रहे हैं, उनका सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है कि मेरे बच्चे आगे आने वाले टाइम पे मेरा बिजनेस कैसे संभालेंगे. एंड दैट इज, सो प्लीज लर्न एंड टीच योर चिल्ड्रन हाउ टू यूज इन्फ्लुएंस इन लाइफ, which is very, very important. And in the end, what I want to tell you guys, and I humbly request to all of you to please, if you can write it down, I will write it on a chat box also. Please do not underestimate your influence on the lives of other people. आपको लगता है कि जो जिनके साथ मैं काम कर रहा हूं, जिनका मैं सीनियर हूं, जिनका मैं बॉस हूं, या जिनका मैं पेरेंट हूं, जिनका मैं कलीग हूं, शायद उनके ऊपर मेरा इन्फ्लुएंस नहीं. ऐसा नहीं है. Everyone opposite working under you or with you is having a positive influence from you, or is having a negative influence from you. Please do not underestimate your influence and do things live. This is the biggest message of leadership in today's life. Because friends, the wrong person in the wrong place will always have regression. The wrong person in the right place will always have frustration. The right person in the wrong place will always have confusion. The right person in the right place will always have progression. हमारी society, हमारा समाज तभी develop करेगा when the right people at right places. As a leader, this is your job to identify the quality in every human being opposite to you. And I strongly believe, friends, great monkeys are great climbers, but even monkeys fall out of tree. पता है क्यों? क्योंकि nobody is perfect. मेरे जीवन की सबसे बेस्ट लाइन है, anyone can make mistakes, but giant learns and correct from their mistakes. और सबको लगता है मैंने गलती कर दी, कोई आफत नहीं है, काम करेंगे तो गलतियां होंगी. क्योंकि मेरा ये मानना है, सड़क कितनी भी साफ हो, धूल हो ही जाती है, और इंसान कितना भी अच्छा हो, भूल हो ही जाती है. This is what the message I wanted to give all of you friends. You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. Sir, as a leadership, Barelia Saab, what I want to convey you is every great leader is a great storyteller. अपनी एक कहानी बनाइए ताकि लोग आपको याद रख सकें. हमारे जितने लीडर्स हैं, हर लीडर की एक कहानी है. इस यंग फोरम पे you guys are, I'm so excited to see so many young guys coming and talking at this platform. Thank you very much for inviting me. May God bless you and your family today and all. Thank you so very much, sir. Pleasure knowing you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shankar. As always, inspirational and a great way to kick off the entire week. Thank you so much. I think our audience absolutely loves this. And I think it's a great way to enthuse positivity and perspective. I also see our former Delhi chairman, Mr. Vikram Bakshi, is here. So I would love to call upon him. Bakshi ji, you have been in the forefront, on the front lines, from the tourism, from the hospitality sector. Delhi finally, perhaps the last of all states in the region, opened up its hotels and tourism. We had earlier talked about this 23% GDP contraction, maybe even 35 if you take the unofficial numbers. What is the state that you see today? Just for 3 to 4 minutes, and if you could just spend maybe 4 or 5 lines with a quick introduction of yourself as well. And we have a good 1.5 hours, and we've already started getting some wonderful questions. Bakshi ji, over to you. We have to unmute you, sir.
Somebody needs to do that. Yes. I think
perfect. There you go. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Aditya. I appreciate your asking me to speak to this great audience that we have. I think I'll just use one line first, and this is very important for us as we stand today. And because that is the one thing that will stop making you look around you. And that one line is simply, it's actually a part of my WhatsApp thing also, is that whatever I need is inside me. So the reason I'm giving you this line is that whatever is happening outside scares us completely, and in a manner that we get confused, we get worried. But effectively, if we start breaking these issues into smaller points, smaller issues, and then start looking at it, you'll find that you'll start getting answers. To give you a very quick brief, I spent most of my years in the hospitality, in what I would call the real estate and hospitality cusp. There are a lot of initial real estate development. Thereafter joined as the joint venture partner for McDonald's. I had the, I would say I was one of the outsiders who came in and managed to get the joint venture. So not only did I have the chance to work with one of the largest multinationals, but very rarely you get a chance to fight a giant too. And God's been very kind. I've got out of it unscathed, and now are managing our hospitality business, which is largely in service apartments and resorts. So that's the introduction. But more importantly for all of us, and especially the young folks who are very confused today, I can only tell you that please get into the trenches yourself. This is the time to break all barriers and look at every aspect of your business from the nitty-gritty. This is not the time to be looking at some large things that are going to happen to us. As we have all realized, our looking beyond ourselves is not gaining us anything. It's actually what we do today. And it's all about, I think it's a theme that is there with CII, which is talking about survive, revive, and finally thrive. And believe me, one can thrive. I know it looks distant right now, but one can thrive because in this crucial period that we have, the way we have been hit, all of us are redefining our business models. And I believe that once you are able to redefine your business models, that means you start off and say, look, my revenue is only going to be 20% or 30% of what it used to be. And how do I now redefine my business model? And where will it go? You'll find that a time will come that as the demand picks up, and which finally it will, we are a country of 1.2 billion people, it finally will, you would have a business model that will give you much better returns than you would ever have imagined. So I know it's distant, it can't be looked at, but yes, we need to survive for that. We need to be able to manage ourselves. We need to remain within our own cash flows. Or even if you have to borrow, we have to ensure that our interest is fully covered with whatever income that revenues that we are generating. And I've actually seen it in 2008 myself. Now, I would say this crisis is far bigger than what happened in 2008, but I've seen this happen in 2008, where we were literally, there with the begging bowl. And 3 years later, everything turned around and we declared one of our highest profits at that time. So that's my little bit.
Actually, thank you so much. Great to have it. If I can now turn over to Madhav Singhania. Madhav has an extraordinary depth and breadth of insight and experience into real world industry. Madhav, would love to see how you're seeing the recovery coming out. We are getting so many conflicting messages. We have, for example, some wonderful questions on which sectors are actually bouncing back, which are not. Would love to get your perspective, and again, a couple of lines of introduction before we kick off. And we now have a good series of questions. So we are right after this, we are going to dive right into those questions. Madhav, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Aditya and CII for having me here today to share my thoughts. In fact, going after so many stalwarts is always a challenge, but I will try and keep it short. So, we're all aware that we are probably touching the highest number of cases on a daily basis now. But I guess this was always expected given the size of our population. Aditya, I'm the Deputy Managing Director and CEO of JK Cement. So I will talk a little more on the cement industry, which is one of the core industries of our country. It comes in one of the 8 core industries. Construction was one of the sectors which was considered from the beginning to have a 25 to 30% decline this year. In fact, that was the projections when things had started, initially. In fact, it's a very important sector because it provides employment to about 50 to 60 million people annually. And if we look at the core industry numbers, then cement demand actually contracted 86% in April, 23% in May, 7% in June, and about 13.5% in July. And now that we can, when we look at these numbers, it's pretty clear that the pent-up demand, which was expected, because of the lockdowns in April and May, is already reflected in these numbers. And heading into monsoon, while monsoon is not a very good time for the construction industry in general, but a good monsoon actually is very good for the economy as a whole. So while the next 3 months may continue to not show the kind of recovery anticipated, but something good happening in terms of agriculture, which is clearly visible even in the negative 23% GDP number, it still shows that agriculture has grown 3.4%. And so has the fertilizer industry, which is also a part of the core sector. So good agriculture should definitely show some respite. Also, what we are seeing is that the government has continued or is still has continued to spend on infrastructure, despite obviously the few contract labor issues that did come across during the lockdowns, as well as they spent on Narega, which created good rural employment opportunities. We, in terms of our own company, we saw, Bakshiji touched upon changing business models. We saw, good recovery in terms of rural demand, which is something, maybe one doesn't have that kind of specific focus, but companies which were focusing on rural demand as well as semi-urban demand actually did much better. And it was a good time for most companies to reinvent their go-to-market strategy, to see, whether we could use digital means of maybe advertising and promotion better, reduce the conventional means, reduce fixed costs where possible. Another thing, which again Bakshiji spoke about, is how can we become more nimble-footed to try and see, how can we reduce our fixed costs? How can we reinvent certain things? Like in our case, we really looked at our fixed costs. What could really be reinvented so that when we come out of this pandemic, we get that multiplication factor, which even Goenka Saab spoke about, in terms of our profitability really improving. As on date, challenges in every manufacturing setup continue. I don't think at this point of time anyone can prevent COVID from entering their premises. But the only thing that can really be done is, can we avoid there being a super spreader? If everyone takes, the desired safety measures, maybe at least super spreaders could be avoided. And given the duration of this pandemic, that it's actually pretty long, we're also seeing people getting casual about measures being taken. But it's important to continue to sustain that. Lastly, in terms of collections, we saw Abhishek speak about GST, and also we are seeing collections had gone down, which is one of the prime sources of revenue for the government. However, at least we are seeing things reach back to maybe 80 to 90% of last year's numbers, which personally I feel is a positive sign. And what we see, if the government really wants to, revive things, it's important that they continue to spend on infrastructure. They continue to spend on government programs such as the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, Manrega, expressways, ports, airports, because good infrastructure will actually create good livelihood opportunities and also bring industry to those regions. Personally, I don't believe, very dramatic reforms are needed at this point, because every dramatic reform takes a few years to actually seep in. And our economy is quite fragile today to take another hit or a jolt of another dramatic reform coming our way. So it's just important to, preserve our cash flows and plan for them. And as Talish said, most companies are planning on a monthly basis, because there is no point doing crystal gazing into what may happen 6 months from now. And it's important to plan on a monthly basis and plan cash flows accordingly. That's about it. Thanks, Aditya.
Madhav, thank you for that perspective. And it's good to see at least some rural recovery is coming in. That at least, India is still very much a rural country. 600 million people are actively engaged in agriculture. And of course, the sad part is we only need 3.5 million, but that's that's another very sad topic to think about. But thank you so much. I want to delve into some of these questions. And for the audience, if you want to direct them specifically at somebody, please do so. That helps me. Otherwise, I'll lay it out for the panel until I see there is some expertise. One very controversial question is from Mayank. And he says very quietly, can we really blame COVID for the fall in GDP? And I think he's sort of alluding to the fact that we've had some spectacular issues in the last 3 to 4 years with the economy in general, both at the central level and even various states deciding that they are going to go a bit mad. And, COVID definitely is causing recessionary issues. But is it COVID plus bad policy, or it's just, COVID alone has caused this sort of disruption? Would anybody like to take a stab at it before I try to volunteer some of you? It's a very controversial question.
I can go ahead.
Great, Abhishek ji.
See, I think this is a very, very pertinent question. But fundamentally, what is happening? Fundamentally, the consumption level has gone down. So, of course, the circulation of the money is in problem. And there is a lot of thought on the investments being made. For instance, the young entrepreneur who would have not thought in a normal circumstance to invest and take risk, may take some steps backwards now, would go a little slowly now, and will be a little pragmatic also in terms of the investments, not only in terms of the new ventures, but also the existing investment, if you see. And we have some panelists here who are working with, the manufacturing sector, closely associated in the service sector, and so on and so forth. So I think the risk appetite has slightly changed. So I think what this pandemic has brought on the paper is that people are now thinking too loud. They want to be very, very sure of the investment. They don't want to be aggressive, seen aggressive. They want to keep cash reserves. And what Madhav also told that, month by month it is seen, and so on and so forth. So basically, everybody wants to keep cash reserve because you do not know what's going to happen after 6 months down the line. So from that perspective, yes, there is a shrink which is happening. As I mentioned earlier, reshuffling of profits will happen. So this is actually the time to invest, in fact, because if we see most of these investments, be it real estate, be it other investments, it will touch the lowest point. And that's when you need to be aggressive in investing, whether this is new venture or property or gold or stocks and so on and so forth. But to answer the question, the problem is aggravated by this pandemic. We can't deny that. There's a complete slowdown. But if you see the recovery happening, and I can relate that with the GST collection numbers, because that's a good indicator of the supply as well. Now, on an average, when we were doing 100,000 crores a month, this month or even the last month, that number is about 85,000. So there is a fall of about 15%, which is not bad if we see the situation. When we know for a fact that automobile sector, the hotel industry, the travel, entertainment, all these are not, even the real estate is not contributing much in terms of the revenue collection or in terms of the GST collection. So from that perspective, a 15% dip in the tax collection now in these months is not bad at all. Now, answering the second question, where he wants to link that whether the economy was...
I was linking that to full credit to Mayank. He implied it. I explicitly asked it.
Exactly. So basically, that can be answered only if we see the entire global eco chain and the global economic environment. You can't see India today in isolation. You will have to appreciate that, is there a global...
Abhishek ji, so let's just assume pre-COVID, right? We had all the reforms in. We had faceless assessment, we had single rate GST, we had all the land reforms, stamp duty reconciliations, the almost 20, 30 blockbuster reforms that we were all hoping for had all been done. Would you still have seen this level of GDP fall off, or would you have been seeing India at a double-digit growth and then paring that down?
No, so of course, with all of these reforms on the cards and all of these initiatives of the government, I would have not seen this sort of a fall. And rightly, because of these reforms, it is that strength which is coming in the system. If these reforms would not have been there, then imagine where we would have been. But of course, this pandemic situation which the country is today facing has contributed to a very large extent in this dip. But having said that, we are still very strong when it comes, to other things. And I think the full credit should go to the government for getting these reforms rolled on.
So I have another great question here. Is this the right time to invest? And love to open it up to the panel. Are we, Neeraj ji has sort of asked this question, is that, the government had announced their COVID package. It was lukewarmly received it was a debt-fueled package. I think they also finally realized, perhaps, although in my opinion, some of the big blockbuster reforms they've done in agriculture, they've done in airspace are truly dramatic. And India is going to really, really take off thanks to them. maybe in the medium term time. But for the short term time, they perhaps weren't enough right now to really, raise the so-called animal spirits and such. And Neeraj's question is that, it has been a bit of an unpredictable moment. When is the vaccine coming? When are government policies going to actually come in? Which sectors are actually going to benefit? What sort of reforms are coming? I think at some way he's trying to predict where's the bottom of the market in which to invest so that things only go up. But how are all of you framing it? Bakshiji, if you're in here, would love to get your perspective. You've seen lots of ups and downs, and you've invested and you've divested in as well. So, how do you identify, are we at the bottom of the market? Is this a good time to invest anywhere? How are you thinking through it?
Well, it all depends where do you want to invest. So if you're talking,
I think they're asking that question to you. Where should they invest?
Where do you invest? Because basically, I'm just saying, if it is the stock market, I think you should have been there 3 months before. Not justifying that things are not going to move further, but all I'm saying is that at different times you have to think about what is the right. Ideally, I would say that we should sit with as much cash as possible right now to first focus on our main business. If our business requires that cash, it's important that we put it into our business, then to start investing it elsewhere. Yes, if you've got excess cash, I mean, the opportunities still are there. The opportunities in terms of buying businesses which are available, buying asset classes which are available, and even in some cases, stocks which are still, not realized their full potential. So always remember, it's a question of your risk, taker ability that you have. So if you are a risk taker, I have been investing. Surprisingly, I've of course first conserved cash and then I've been investing.
Where are you investing?
So I've invested quite a bit in the stock market 3 months ago, or the last 3 months.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So one part of it which has worked well, I must admit. I'm now looking very, very carefully at real estate, especially distressed real estate, in trying to see and I'm not looking at distressed real estate in terms of better prices. I'm looking at distressed real estate which are already having income coming in. That means there is a revenue model there, and you're trying to see if you can get it anywhere between 7 to 8% or 9% or 10% return, which will be great, because not only do you get an asset at a lower value, but you start generating revenue straight away. So that's the second part of it that one has been looking at. Frankly, one has also looked at gold. Again, a great investment because gold is expected to go up in the next 2 years, anywhere from 20 to 40%. If excess cash is available.
But Vikramji, so to make sure we stay on Neeraj's specific question, how is your investment thesis analyzing or taking into consideration government policy uncertainty?
See, I think let's be quite honest. I have stopped looking at what the government is doing. Like I said when I started out, saying that I think time is to manage your own things and try and stop thinking about what the government is going to do for us or how they're going to do for us. Because frankly, we don't determine this. None of us sitting out here determine this, and we have realized this. We can go and sell ourselves. We can go and explain to the government what needs to be done. But frankly, it's they decide when they want to do something. So I've stopped looking at what the government is doing. I think if and that's why I'm saying I think we shouldn't waste too much of time looking around. We should start looking at, of course, first your very own business and how do you make it survive. And if you've got excess, funds available, look around. There are various avenues even now which are worth investing in, but be very careful.
So well taken. So you're on the side of something that Mr. Deep Kalra has also said, that through the COVID-19 thing that the government declared you're all on your own. So if you're on your own, you should make your investing decisions on your own and not depend for rabbits out of hats. If they come, very nice, but that can't be your fundamental thesis.
I fully agree with him.
Brilliant. Lots of questions around Madhav, I'm going to put you in a spot here because I know you think of this deeply, and Talishji as well. We have a great question on how should governments manage the demands of people and consumers versus business ecosystems. I know the way the question has been asked by the gentleman, that there's a fundamental assumption there that what is good for business is perhaps not good for the masses, or vice versa. Both of you are seeing large organizations, large employers, how they actually operate, build, and do. But then there's also the issue of safety first, and then maybe economy second. And I think that is a little bit degrading as people are losing jobs and thinking at. How are you seeing governments balance that need? And can they, Madhav, starting with you perhaps, how should governments balance the needs of and the demands of people with their desire to do ecosystem building? And to put a very fine point on it, and to bring it back into the case of Delhi, with the government losing pretty much most of its revenues, it can't go for any one of its social agendas or plans or education or health or anything, because it doesn't have the money to do it. But then a lot of people are saying that if you put in, two business-friendly policies, it may not be in the best interests of people. How should the government balance those questions?
See, Aditya, I think the 2 points are independent, because irrespective COVID, no COVID, the government should have some industry kind of policies to bring industry here. I mean, today we are talking about, industries coming from China, or with this whole trade war, it creating opportunities for India. I mean, it doesn't need a COVID for any of this to really happen. I mean, I really think policy is independent of COVID. Now, to your second question, what should the government do in terms of prioritizing its spend? There are, lots of perspectives being given here. According to me, it's very tough for anyone to sit there and actually create policy or decide on how it should be spent, the money spent, because things are evolving on a daily basis. Initially, it was life first, which is why the lockdowns happened. Post that, we've clearly reached a point wherein, lockdowns won't generate the revenue which the governments need. So they are seeing that, they have to start opening, which is also leading to the cases going up. Now, the revenue that they are getting from it, I think first they'll have to just look at how to recover from whatever they have lost in April and May.
Well, right now, the first thing is to be able to pay the salaries of the government. They can't even cover that, right?
So that's the most obvious thing. And then after that, as I said, I feel the government needs to spend whatever is left, or the PSUs need to spend on their capexes. They need to really, start the spending cycle, so that it brings more confidence in terms of the private individuals and companies to then also start spending. So the government will have to lead the way in spending. I gave an example of infrastructure. There could be many other such examples, but they need to start spending at some point to revive.
Talishji, your thoughts. How should government balance the needs and demands, most importantly, of common people and individuals versus the realities of building business ecosystems?
So I tend to think of government as an organization, right? And it's going to be the same as every organization. So I think one of the patterns that is there is let's take a step back from this question of this versus that. Now, in any organization, as I started with, I think there needs to be putting on your thinking hat more frequently. And second is to give transparency as to what's happening. I think one of the large reasons why consumer sentiment is what it is sitting at, and I heard all the others as well, right now is the time to preserve cash. Now, how did that we come to that analysis? Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know whether the demand is going to be back. So how do we drive the demand cycle? And that's human nature, that the moment you don't know, you start to conserve things. And that's where the demand cycle tends to break. So I think the first thing that the government needs to do is to bring about transparency in terms of the various models and scenarios as they're emerging. So here, as we're sitting, can any of us, and we are all from the industry as well as the audience, and all of us collectively, can we say what's going to happen in March 2021? With certainty, we can say it for our organization. Can we say that for the government? I'm not very sure at the moment. So I think we also need to be able to put in some sort of method of transparency where the government gives various models saying, look, if this works out like this is how it is. Because let's be honest here, this is a unprecedented time. Nowhere in the world have any organizations or governments. I mean, I would love to hear if in September 2019 had anyone come up with a scenario, because if they did, I would have gone to them, because I'd heard so many scenarios, so many simulations that took place, but nobody said that this was coming, except for maybe some speech somewhere where they said, well, maybe something like this, maybe it's a war, maybe some
black swan. I mean, I mean, the joke is some Jyotishis right somewhere in the world, right?
Yeah, some Jyotishis. And given that, I think we need to be able to look as a government at the government as a part of us, and therefore there needs to be constant interaction between the government and various interests. Now, where it comes to whether it is going to be industry-friendly policies versus public interest, or basically what is right now being described as the economic impact versus what is the impact on the population that is there. As we have seen, and it's already on, unlock started way back in May. It was because the government had been in the process of building up capacity building. Once capacity building was through, they had to put it out. But I'm also asking this, and I think Madhav touched upon it, which is the level of awareness do we show as a citizenry? You see, today wearing a mask is not about me, it's about the other person. What are the community concerns? And that's something that also at an organizational level needs to be reflected in organization. So what am I doing when I'm conserving cash? I am in certain senses affecting the demand cycle. So if we're talking about the fact that yes, the governments do need to spend, and I think the government has been spending. So let's keep in mind that 60% of our economy is agrarian. A large part of India looks into rural as well as semi-rural areas. And there has been a sort of latent demand that has come up, which has surprised a lot of people. But at the same time, that is because there has been spending by the government. Of course, the government will need to go out and spend, because that's the surest way for them to put money back into the economy. And with putting money back, it means that there is much more in circulation. So there is a consumer confidence that is done. But it's also about you and me at every level. So I believe that when we're looking at, what should the government do outside of transparency, I think there is very little that there is any precedent of the government doing. Of course, the government can get into very many measures. Now, what should organizations be looking at? I think organizations need to be talking to their representatives that are sitting in the government and constantly asking them to reanalyze, because what is a government except for an organization? So reanalyze, get the stakeholders back, and do that reanalysis on a month-on-month, so that there are scenarios that have built up. Remember, we are an economy which has fared very well in the way that the world has moved. And therefore, I, repeatedly ask this question of anyone who tells me that, we're in a very bad state right now. So my first thing is that, start looking at all the crises right back there, and then start thinking whether it has affected India and how has it affected India. So in that sense, while the numbers may be depressing currently, there are times that, when you move beyond the numbers, you start seeing the kind of work both the government is putting in, as well as entrepreneurs, as well as business houses. You see, because the kind of changes that have been brought about this rapidly could not have been done if we all did not have that kind of appetite. You and I, we are still sitting and talking about this. We're running our businesses. We have everything that's going in. And in that, I think what is needed right now, both the government as well as organizations, is to look at it in a planned policy positive manner. So I call it the 3 Ps. I run that in the organization. I talk to organizations about it. What's your plan? Can you be positive about your plan? Okay. And what is the policy? And policy and plans are two very different things. So that is where I would leave it at that.
So I just add my 2 cents to this. One, I actually completely disagree with the notion that what is good for business is bad for people. I think particularly in Delhi, this has basically shown the symbioticness between government and business and people. If 70% of your social revenues are raised from business activity, if you ask businesses to leave a state like Delhi, you don't have money. And yes, every business is unique. They have to work with their people to make sure that they are safe. But I think the government needs to recognize that the only way a country like India, just on a macro level, and although I want to be positive, and hearing Talish ji, hearing Shankar ji always makes me very, very positive. One of my biggest issues, however, coming in is that even before COVID-19, on a national level, if India grows at 7%, we create 3 million formal jobs a year. That compares to 14 million looking for jobs every year. We have an agrarian sector which employs 600 million people, when even at a medium efficiencies, you only need 3.5 million. So I think part of the struggle is not so much COVID-19, but inherently dealing with 1.3 billion people and scaling up is a tough job for anybody, including government. And so the only way to do it is to really unleash market forces, really unleash a huge amount of creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And as long as your policies support that in the right way, and I think that's where things go wrong, and that's why people get upset. That is the only way India can grow, and that's the only way you will attract the investment and push forward. And I'll leave it at that. Kamalji has asked a great question, and Shankarji, I want to get you in on this. How are we bridging the digital divide, and how can we do this between we have seen this COVID-19, and Kamalji, I'm paraphrasing for you on this. We have one of the biggest things that has come out here is the so-called India mobile smartphone revolution was exposed on how much it works, how much it doesn't work, right? We have so many students and children all across the country who with this entire get educated at home isn't working. They don't have access to smartphones. They don't have access to laptops. They don't have access to broadband. And although this government has done perhaps more than most in the past 5 to 6 years to really push electrification, push telecom, and of course we had the geo revolution as well, but it has been a massive setback, and education is continuously being a setback because schools are unable to open. And even if the private schools open, it is very unlikely the government schools will open, and they're unable to provide education at home to students. Shankarji, your thoughts, how can we bridge this digital divide? What are the actions that maybe people in the audience can take or the government can take to really see how we can get media digital down to the last population of the country? Shankarji, are you there? Shankarji?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Please, Ji, how can we bridge this digital divide? I know you've worked on media. I know you've worked on access. How can we bridge this digital divide, making sure every student, every person in India post-COVID-19 has access to some basic digital infrastructure?
Sir, if you ask me honestly, I'm giving you my opinion since you asked me, sir.
Giving your opinion, sir, please.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, the biggest mistake our education industry or so-called digital world doing right now is, since childhood हम क्या बच्चों को सिखाते हैं? ईमानदारी से बात करो, ओरिजिनल बन के रहो, और हम क्या कह रहे हैं? इंटेलिजेंस हरदम ओरिजिनल होती है, और हम सिखा क्या रहे हैं कि आप आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस को पढ़ो. in my school, my children are asking me कि sir, how come intelligence can be artificial? तो इसका मतलब अभी तक आपने जो हमें कुछ पढ़ाया है, हंसना, लिखना, खेलना, रिस्पेक्ट करना, ये सब कुछ आर्टिफिशियल है. So why a industry cannot give a better name than saying intelligence and that too artificial? I believe something there's a disconnect. Number one. Number two, हम ना हमारी गवर्नमेंट, ना हमारा एजुकेशन सिस्टम और ना हमारे पेरेंट्स, ना हमारे टीचर्स कहीं डिफाइन कर रहे हैं. आपका मन होता है, आप कहते हैं बच्चों डिजिटल मोबाइल गलत है, इससे फोकस हटता है. दूसरी तरफ आप क्या कह रहे हो कि भाई नहीं, इसी से पढ़ो. In my school, sir, from the COVID, except class 10th and 12th, I never took one session digitally. I says कोई आफत थोड़ी ना आगे 6 महीने बाद पढ़ लेना. I believe our government, our education system need to set a parameter. हमें पढ़ाना है, कितनी देर पढ़ाना है, उसको कैसे इंटीग्रेट करना है और उसको कैसे हम पिक्चर के साथ इन्वॉल्व करें. आज के सर डिजिटल वर्ल्ड में सर CII के प्लेटफॉर्म पे मैंने देखा, we have done so many seminars, day in day out we are doing it. पर सर आप ईमानदारी से अपनी ऑडियंस से पूछिए कि जो डिजिटल पढ़ाया गया वो रिटेन कितना कराया. What is the point of learning when आप बच्चों को छोड़ दीजिए सर, हम सीनियर लोगों ने, एक आदमी भी पेन पेपर लेके नहीं बैठता है सर. मैंने इतने सेमिनार कॉन्फ्रेंसेस करे हैं, मैंने देखा you need to force them, you need to tell them कि बाबा कागज पेन लिखो, क्योंकि इंसान सुनता है मन भर, सुनने के बाद प्रवचन देता है टन भर और खुद ग्रहण नहीं करता है कण भर. सो जब तक कोई भी पढ़ाई लिखाई चाहे बच्चों की हो चाहे हमारी हो सर, जब तक रिटेंशन पावर का तरीका नहीं बढ़ाएंगे सर, मेरे ख्याल से डिजिटल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन नहीं होगा.
But Shankari, to push back, fully agreed on the pedagogical issues, and you have very nicely outlaid them. But assuming we are now talking about digital India, digital economy, all services will be available digitally. And the fortunate part is कि we have a very young population.
Yes.
No, unlike, and that's helped us through COVID-19. Our death rate is much lower than, let's say, Italy or some other countries which had a majority older population.
Yes,
we
sir.
also presume they are able to adapt to a digital environment a little bit better, even if it's not just education, but also government services, forms, this, that, etc.
Bilkul.
What can we do to make sure that this digital divide is thing? I mean, to be honest, we've gone a long way in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, and I think hats off to Jio, and what they've been able to do is to bring down a price point for a data plan and a mobile phone that, every single person you see on the street is now streaming live to their phones.
Yes, sir.
But there is still a digital gap, and the worry is that we'll still leave a lot of people behind.
सर मुझे लगता है कि बच्चों से शुरू से प्रैक्टिकल कराइए. बच्चों को हमने खाली यूट्यूब तक सीमित कर दिया. यदि समझो आप चाह रहे हैं कि जीएसटी है या ये छोटी छोटी बातें, आज कॉमर्स का बच्चा है सर 11th 12th के अंदर, सर चाहे आपके स्कूल हो चाहे मेरे स्कूल में, आज भी हम उनको नहीं कह रहे कि आप जीएसटी कैसे पढ़ो, हम उनको वही पढ़ा रहे जो आज से 50 साल पहले पढ़ाया जा रहा था. तो सर यदि आपको ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन लाना है तो सर ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, जो करंट सिनेरियो है, जो करंट टेक्निक्स हैं, जो करंट गजेट्स हैं, जो करंट फॉर्म है, वो यदि बच्चों के इन बिल्ट के अंदर प्रैक्टिकल एक्सपीरियंस के अंदर हम लाएंगे ना सर, तो शायद बच्चों को इसका फायदा होगा. सर आपको मैं एक एजुकेशन इंडस्ट्री का एक छोटा सा एग्जांपल देना चाहता हूं सर. फार्मास्यूटिकल इंडस्ट्री सर, दुनिया में भारत में हजारों फार्मास्यूटिकल्स कॉलेजेस हैं सर, हर साल उनका इंस्पेक्शन होता है सर, और इंस्पेक्शन के अंदर एक मैंडेटरी है कि टैबलेट मेकिंग मशीन होनी चाहिए. सर वो पता है आपको टैबलेट मेकिंग मशीन कौन सी है जो 1940 में लगा करती थी? इंस्पेक्शन के नाम पर हमें को मशीन किराए पे लेके आते हैं सर, 20,000 रुपए के अंदर वो इंस्पेक्टर कर जाता है और वो जाता है. वो मशीन सर 1940 की, इट मैन्युफैक्चर्स ओनली 2000 टैबलेट्स अ डे, और आज जो मशीन है 20 टैबलेट्स अ डे पर बच्चे प्रैक्टिस कर रहे हैं. इस वजह से
point well taken. So we are talking about digital India, yes, but from what I'm getting from you, G, is that all we are doing in digital India is creating a nation of consumers, yes, who consume media, but they are not able to create or do anything practically.
Yes, practical experience karaiye bachcho ka, that would be helpful to us, sir.
I want to move on to a few more questions. Abhishek ji, a lot of questions coming in for you. This entire tussle between states and center on GST, revenues falling, guarantees given, loans coming out. Uh, two parts. One, where do you think this is going? And second part, where do you think, one of the big things that we'd all hoped for during COVID-19 was that this would be the time to reform GST, go from our 5-6 rates, and if you add Kerala, 12 rates, 1,024 filings, all of this back and forth, bring it down to a manageable level, and COVID-19, GST revenues down, impetus for all the states to now meet and get this reform done. Instead, all the meetings are now about fighting over money.
Yeah.
Where do you see this going?
See, I think, frankly, all of these state governments and the federal government will have to act very maturely. When the GST Council was formed and under the leadership of Mr. Arun Jaitley, there was not even a single instance when there was voting. Now, of course, everybody knows that this is the phase when the entire country, including the governments, are going through some rough patch. It is very important for all of these mature governments to come together and reach a consensus. Now, what was promised in 2017 was based on the annual growth rate, where the base was taken for 15-16. In that year, nobody would have anticipated that in 2020, there would be such a massive situation wherein there will not be any growth or the revenues will go down. So everybody will have to be a little pragmatic from that perspective, that that number which was promised by the federal government to compensate for the loss of revenue to the states may have to be deviated a bit. Still, as we speak, the federal government is not saying that they will not honor what they were supposed to pay. That will happen. But what will happen is that there will be some deferment. So I think in such a situation, it is important. Now, two things are relevant. One, the government is not saying that they would go back from the word in terms of giving the money. It would be just the tenure which could change. That is one. Secondly, this option of giving loan may not look very good on papers, because the state may say that, why should I take a loan and who bears the interest cost on that loan, and why should I? Because if there is a loss due to whatever situation, that situation was either anticipated or not anticipated at that point of time, was never documented. So the only relief which can now come is through the compensation cess.
But Abhishek, have you seen the government take the position that force majeure, our need to give you that 5-year thing is out the window now? Have you seen that raised, or they're still being circumspect about it?
I have examined all of those very, very closely. So what will happen is that, one, there would be either extension of this period from 5 years to whatever, 6 years, 7 years. That is one. Secondly, they may, if they want the immediate relief, they could take that by way of loan. My point is that we need to be solution oriented, and my other panelists have been speaking about getting new solutions onto the table. Now, if the state and the federal government fights for this compensation, says that's not a good sign for any economy, and even people outside India are watching this very closely, how the governments are responding. So I think what's most important is to get solution on the table. Of course, we understand that at this point of time, there could not be a situation where tax rates are increased, which means that this compensation cess, which is there on certain products, that cannot be increased. But yes, there are some thoughts by which the tax would not increase. The states which are receiving less of money by way of reduction in the revenue collection can still get more from the federal government. So there are certain formulas. I am personally working on some of these formulas to be mathematically correct, that how with the same sort of revenue, the government could compensate the states in a much, much better way. So I'm not concluding as of now, but arithmetically it is possible. The government needs to do this out of the box thinking, rather than asking the states to take loan or extending this period. The dip is only 15%. Understand, the base which is calculated is on 15-16. So if the government arithmetically computes it right now also and shifts some of the tax portion to the compensation cess, especially in those states where the consumption of particular goods or services is much more and there is no need to compensate to those states, there could still be some practical number juggling which could happen, which could give relief to all of the states which today need this compensation to be given due to lack of due to low collections. So I think arithmetic is very important here.
Thank you very much. Look on that perspective. But do you see that therefore this massive GST reform which you're hoping for is punted to next year, or do you think it'll happen this year? Full disclaimer to everybody: anything that Abhishek ji commits to here is not legally committable. You cannot sue him for saying that it'll happen this year or next year, and it won't happen. But gut feeling, this year, next year.
This year, in the immediate future, it looks a little difficult. We hardly have too much of time. Next year looks very practical. But I think, and I've been listening to a lot of other panelists also with respect to what can be done for businesses and the link between the businesses and the common people. And I think what suggestion I would want to give to the government at this stage, which is very, very important, is also decriminalization of white collar crimes. There have been instances, if we talk about the GST arrests in 2018 and 19, there are 1,620 arrests which have happened in 1 year. Now, assuming in half of these cases, or probably more, even the charge sheets have not been filed, people are behind bars for these. We have seen that in the income tax also, where for provident fund issues, when the issue is only 1 lakh rupee, the promoter of a company who would be having a turnover of 500 crores would be behind bars for years. So I think that traumatization needs to shift. Decriminalization of such of these things have to happen. The government needs money. If there is a default of 1 lakh of provident fund or a dispute of 1 lakh provident fund, impose a penalty 100 times. Ask him to pay 1 crore straight to the government by way of penalty, but don't put him behind the bars for years. That doesn't help businesses. That doesn't help economy. Have harsh penalties. By no stretch of imagination, I want to say that I want to encourage such activities, but the level to discourage these activities have to be different, will have to be looked differently, especially in these times that the country is going through the rough patch. Businesses need to be motivated. Just putting people behind bars will not happen. We have seen that in the landmark decision of MakeMyTrip.com, wherein the senior people were sent behind bars and the courts had to intervene. That's exactly what is happening now. So much of this is happening in terms of arrests, whether these are GST, fake invoices cases and other circular trading cases, whether these are income tax issues related to provident funds and so on and so forth. So I think that needs to change. That needs to fundamentally. Government needs revenue, impose penalty. Don't promise.
Very well taken. And in fact, I have it on very good authority that the government has already started taking industry representation and chamber representation for this sort of decriminalization. I think more than even the thought process on really, transforming GST, people should not be afraid of going to jail just because they're trying to improve business. And certainly under COVID-19 and that uncertainty, that itself will be a huge boost to this. I want to just get the panel's thought. I mean, we have a number of questions on when do they think that COVID-19 will be over and when we will actually start seeing a recovery. Starting with Vikram Bakshi, and then we'll go step by step, please. Both the COVID-19 and then where you think the economy, one of the issues is that we had a contraction of 23%. A lot of people are saying, well, that was just the June quarter. Now things are going to get better. We can only go up from here. But if you were to right now, and based on current evidence, there could be a massive vaccine announced tomorrow morning. There could be a massive failure happening there. Gut feel right now, where do you see COVID-19 sort of tapering off? And when do you see the economy sort of going back online?
So I have a very cautious approach. I do believe that whatever our revenues and profitability was in 2019, we will only see that coming probably somewhere closer to 2022, 2023. While I might say the revenues will not come back even fully by that time, But yes, the profitability will come in. So therefore, my own approach is don't look for quick answers. Continue to work on your business models. Continue to find ways of creating alternate revenue sources within your own business. I'm not asking you to go and start doing another business, but try within your own business, see what kind of revenue models that you can create, on the basis of which you do believe that maybe by 2022, you will come back with a bang, at least on the profitability side, even if the revenues don't achieve that. That means basically saying that the economy is going to be sluggish, will continue remaining sluggish for at least the next 2 years.
Taleshji, your thoughts? Do you agree with Vikramji, or he's been cautious? You've been a lot more optimistic.
Yeah, so I am optimistic, but I'm never optimistic about the fact, are we going to go back in India to a stage that we were in 2019? I think there are three angles from which I would look at. One is the economic angle. Are we really going to be at that level in terms of individual businesses? Of course, I don't see that returning till about 2022. I'd go with Vikramji on that one. The second part that I want people to focus on is that things are not going to return ever back to the pre-COVID days, because the new normal has set in. You see, people that have gotten used to certain things, there are certain things that are going to become obsolete completely. And we must be prepared for that.
I'm going to very specifically ask on that. And Bakshiji, I want to get you back on this. And then as you go down the panel, etc., there, my thought and feeling right now is that there is a consumer and a business behavior tipping point. At some point, things that were done due to being coerced or having no choice start becoming habit. People not wanting to go out becomes habit. Businesses not want to travel or do global expansion goes from compulsion to habit. At what point do you see that tip off happening if this continues? That a lot of consumer behaviors will be fundamentally changed. And as Shankarji said, all the textbooks we teach in marketing of how consumers behave, behavioral economics, all our great people will have to throw out those windows and restart understanding how this happens. When do you see the tipping point, Taleshji? Has there been one? And if so, on that change in consumer behavior, where do you see it?
So I think there has already been a minor tipping point that's come across, and that's mostly because if you look at common psychology, which says that it takes you that much time to change your behavior. Typically, it's between 3 weeks to 3 months. Since the 3 months has happened, there has been quite a bit that you see in terms of consumer behavior coming in. So, for example, if you were to look at the fact that while there is a revival of tourism, a lot of people are preferring to go to the Airbnbs, the bread and breakfast joints for a workcation instead of looking at taking that runway weekend for three days when there is a longer weekend. I do see the fact that by November, there would be an irrevocable tipping point wherein there would be habit changing. Now, where have I come from that analysis from? That's mostly about the fact that if you look at, by November, we would have sort of been through 6 months of such a cycle. And I think a lot of people are likely to contract in terms of their needs, in terms of what has been described by the millennials as #FOMO. So I think I see a lot of that going out. But with that, I also see a lot of change coming in terms of perspective. So you do see a lot of brands that have seen themselves through, whether it is delivery or logistics brands, or you're looking at those that have been working internally on people. So for example, educational institutions, you're already beginning to see that in terms of this year, in terms of, I think Jindal Law School, I was watching, they said that they've had record number of admissions that have taken place. So you see a lot of people going back there. But November is when I would put it across to an irrevocable tipping points for certain habits to happen. Now that depends on market to market as well as product to product. That's one part of it. Does that answer your question, Aditya-ji?
Raji, as a lawyer, you've kept it very happily, both sides of it. Bakshiji, back to, and just on this small point, because I know you're being cautious, do you see a tipping point? And if you see so, where do you see it? And particularly in the tourism and hospitality sector, or it's just, people are just waiting for this lockdown and all to get over, and they're, they might take 2-3 months, but they're back to the joyous travel experiences and huge globalization and going out and that we saw in 2019?
Well, I would say the tipping point to quite an extent has already happened. So if you ask me today, would I ever want to go back to having large offices function from? My answer is no. I much better prefer sitting quietly in a far off place, and you could be in any part of the world and managing, your office. Would you want me to be holding those specific meetings as I used to do, going every day to the office at 9 o'clock, coming back at 6 or 7 o'clock? I'd ideally like to hold them virtually. I think COVID has taught us a hell of a lot. And one thing for sure is that a lot of our time was actually getting wasted. Bringing to another point, it's mostly on consumers. Think about it very clearly. 80 to 85% of all our purchases today are online. And even if you come back and there is going to be an offer by retailers or restaurateurs to try and bring you back into the restaurants, I would think you may wean off only about 15% of the converted folks. So as a consumer, I'm already converted. The kind of variety that I can see online, I cannot go and see in a single shop. And once you start learning how that works, you realize that you are not only saving money, you're saving time. And more importantly, you have anything and everything that you want available to you. So I think that tipping point has already started happening. To what manner or what percentage can you wean it back to the old days will be one huge effort, and some real resources will have to be spent by businesses to try and bring people back in the markets.
Madhav, your thoughts?
No, see, I completely agree with what Vikramji has said. The way we look at it this year, we should it's a wait and watch year. Maybe by March, if something changes, then next year should be better. But I do see that, let's say from an economic standpoint, maybe this year we see a degrowth which changes the base. And next year we should again start seeing some growth because the base this year would be much lower. In terms of consumer habits, that has changed. I completely agree with Vikramji. I mean, people are used to the new normal. I mean, they are itching to get back to some of the things they used to do. So some things may revive. I mean, I'm sure most of us would like a holiday once this thing is done. But the way of working with this whole virtual world has become quite convenient as well. So a lot of it is here to stay. It will probably be a mix of what it used to be along with this new world.
Madhav, more specifically, are you saying that your cement business is going to take a hit now because people are not going to build new offices, or is it going to go crazily up because people now want 3 more rooms in their house?
See, house
because it works both ways, right? When consumer behaviors change.
So you see, I think in terms of real estate, as well as in terms of the auto industry, I think there are two things which there have been many predictions made. But the way the auto industry has also revived, and also the way, people still like to have their own house, or they like to have their own office. It may be smaller in size, but a home is actually the place where...
My argument was that maybe they now want bigger homes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Around the world, we've seen that's happening in the US. Now that the data is coming in, we are seeing that in Europe. People are abandoning flats. They're trying, where they can afford, they're trying to get villas. People who are in a 1-bedroom flat are now trying to go to a 2 or a 3-bedroom. They're happy going a little bit further, as Bakshiji said, to try and, because they don't need to be as centrally located as earlier. But, all we've been talking about requiring kids to have their own Zoom rooms and, both people working from home, those are fundamental consumer behavioral changes? Or do you just see that, okay, once COVID is over, people are like, okay, let's put this trauma behind us. On one hand, Facebook is saying that we are going to do work from home while they just signed a multi-million-dollar square feet lease in the heart of New York, right? you know, you know, Pinterest is saying that we are doing work from home, but they're now signing massive office space deals all across the country. So, I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a dichotomy here, right?
No, so let me put it this way, Aditya. You're absolutely right when it comes to the home bit, because the home is the one place where everyone has realized it's that one place of comfort which you can really rely on. Especially, during this pandemic. I mean, living in a rented accommodation or living in a place, there are so many people who've had issues. If you come COVID positive, your landlord's asking you to vacate. There are hundreds of issues which have come up, and having your own home, it's given a sense of reassurance to people. So that bit is there, even in terms of people returning, migrant laborers returning. I mean, I also feel rural demand has come because people probably went back and the houses had to be, a room had to be added, something had to be done to accommodate people who typically worked in cities. In addition, in terms of commercial spaces, I feel it's going to be a mix. People may scale down size. As you said, there are mixed views here, but
but the views are not mixed. My issue is actions are not matching statements. Work from home, but we are signing these multi-million square feet leases.
so that's why it's going to be, see, Aditya, it's going to be a hybrid model that people are going to come to. There will be more flexibility. I mean, for a long time, Indian offices still had the time system that you had to come in at 9 o'clock and maybe leave at 6 o'clock, and your attendance was marked accordingly. Other than obviously the digital companies which had grown over the last decade or 2 decades. So those things are changing in terms of people being flexible, the human resources being flexible, and people working from home effectively. But maybe you still retain a chair for them in the office, or you have kind of open seating. So it's important, and the work environment itself may change from having just seating areas. There may be few more areas to interact, because the day someone comes to the office, he's coming more for that personal touch rather than looking at the screen at home. So
so
that is
much more hotel lobby, water cooler, less cubicles.
people may reinvent their offices completely after this.
Shankarji, your take. When is COVID going to end? When is the economy going to recover? And do you see a tipping point in consumer behavioral pattern changes? If so, when and what?
Sir, I belong to education industry, and we are having the toughest time. मेट्रोज में तो फीस मिल रही है सर, आप छोटी जगह में जाके देखिए, we are not recovered even 5% fees. नंबर 1. नंबर 2, मुझे लगता है कि एजुकेशन पैटर्न बिल्कुल बदल गया. नंबर 3, मुझे लगता है कि सर जो रिकवरी वाली बात है, you can, if I ask the panel or everyone attending this seminar, if I ask them कि बाबा कोविड आज खत्म हुआ, आप सबसे पहले क्या करोगे? बोले यार 2-4-5 दिन की छुट्टी लेके जाऊंगा. Everyone want to have
Madhav, you might want to get a trip going, huh? We can all do a CII working session somewhere.
So everyone want to have a holiday. मुझे सर एक और महसूस हुआ कि इन दिनों में the places like Rishikesh and all the Pahad area, people wanted to make a place for themselves there so that they can go and relax there. सर मुझे लगता है इकोनॉमी बहुत अच्छी होगी, बहुत जल्दी रिवाइव करेगी. दिसंबर के बाद में ट्रेंड में चेंज आएगा, और मेरे को लगता है 2021 is going to be a very very fantastic, extremely fantastic year. जो चैलेंज है वो इनबिल्ट हैप्पीनेस का है. मेरा ये मानना है सर, दुनिया में सब कहते हैं आप आगे बढ़ो, पर मुझसे नहीं. इस समय जो हमारी सोसाइटी में सर, मैंने अभी कहा था, जो सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है वो है ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट का. चाहे वो घर है, चाहे परिवार है, चाहे रिलेशनशिप है, चाहे बिजनेस है. इस समय ट्रस्ट लेवल हैज गॉन डाउन सो मच, एंड आई स्ट्रांगली बिलीव सर, इफ देयर इज अ ब्रेकडाउन इन ट्रस्ट, there's a breakdown in communication.
Shankari, so talk to me a little bit about trust. One of the biggest issues that India has faced is that we are ranked number 163 in the world in contractual enforcement.
Yeah.
And the argument is that India therefore is a trust-based economy, because if you can't enforce contracts, most people are operating their businesses on trust. Where have you seen the trust breakdown? And I think that's a very, very important point that you've raised, and particularly as you're talking about consumer behavior change, who have they stopped trusting?
Yeah. So now, sir, जैसा अभी माधव सर ने कहा कि work from home. Now, honestly, ask everyone who is there कि हमें कितना ट्रस्ट है कि जो लोग घर से काम कर रहे हो अपना 100% दे रहे हैं, चाहे भले ही वो दे रहे हो. ये बड़ा फाइन लाइन है सर. इस समय आप किसी भी अपने लोगों को पूछिए कितना काम, साहब हमने तो जान लगा रखी है. रिजल्ट, आउटपुट, डिलीवरेबल्स कैसा है? यहां पर डेफिसिट है सर. सर परिवारों के बीच में, बच्चों के बीच में, सर I do a program and I really want, under your leadership, sir, I want to do one program कि अपने तो अपने ही होते हैं. आदित्य सर, इस समय देश का जो सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है ना सर, आप तो सब लोग बिजनेस वाले हो, मैं तो रिलेशनशिप में ज्यादा बात करता हूं सर. मेरा ये मानना इस समय जो सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है, दैट इज द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन फादर एंड सन. सर, द ट्रस्ट हैज गॉन डाउन सो मच एट दैट लेवल सर. कंज्यूमर की बात यदि हम करें सर, तो कोई भी आदमी हो, एवरीवन वांट टू गो फॉर अ ब्रांड, चाहे छोटा है चाहे बड़ा हो. ये ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट हो गया है सर. पहले सर कहीं भी चले गए, कहीं भी खा लिए, कहीं भी पी लिए, कहीं भी कुछ कर लिए, हगिंग हैज गॉन आउट ऑफ आवर लाइफ सर. तो ये ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट ही तो है ना सर.
जी, very well taken. Perhaps
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. I spoke a little bit out of the line.
No. But I take your point, sir. Very well put. One of the things that I'll just add the layer to it is that who can you trust? Can you trust your government? Can you trust your housing society? Can you trust your doctor? Can you trust your distant relatives? COVID-19 has been a test of trust for everybody. And that is something that is truly, that will go beyond COVID-19. Lessons learned, for some very great lessons. They found that there are a lot of people they could trust, a lot of companies, vendors, suppliers, supply chain, who's going to pay, who's not going to pay, who's there for you, who's going to arbitrarily terminate contracts. And so there is a bit of a trust reset all across the economy as well. And that, I think, will have a far-ranging repercussions in how businesses and all change their behaviors. Abhishek ji, your thoughts? COVID-19, when it's ending, consumer behavior changes, tipping points.
If we see quarter one, of course, there was a 24% dip as compared to the same quarter last year. There's no doubt about it. If we see the number of unemployment which may be generated because of this COVID, that is expected to be about 12 crores. What I feel is that the fundamental way of doing businesses will change. Whether it is work from home, whether it is trust deficit, whether whatever. I think this phase will make everybody adapt to the new way of doing business. People will be forced to take measures to ensure what is good for their business. And that's why, whether it comes to the consumer pattern, the buying patterns, or the fundamental way of doing businesses, that will undergo fundamental change. Things will be very, very different in the next financial year. Talking about the economy, I think economy will bounce back. There is no doubt about that. India will do significantly well next year onwards. We will see a lot of manufacturing happening here. The sentiments with respect to imports will completely change. There are messages from top leadership to even the simplest of people in India, which today feel that Make in India has a lot of essence. So I think we will see this Diwali, that a lot of imports from countries, from neighboring countries, there will be a significant shift. I think the government is taking right measures towards protectionism as well. We would very, very soon see a lot of measures with respect to anti-dumping duties. India, as we speak, is arguing against the US at the WTO forum. There is that international case which is going on. India may have lost at the first level, but we have appealed in the second level. I'm sure that with this situation, there will be more opportunity for India to impose certain restrictions, which will ensure that our domestic and indigenous consumption and indigenous production gets incremental benefit. I think this is the time when India should take those measures to protect our MSME sector. MSME, the data very, very clearly says that 74% of the MSME business doesn't want to invest right now, or is shrinking, or is reducing in terms of investment. So I think when I say fundamental way of doing business, the government will have to support MSME sector. The Indian exporters will have to be encouraged. Imports will have to be decreased. Protectional measures, protectionism will have to come into play. This is the time wherein not only the economic situation, but otherwise the political situation could lead to the consequential effect when government can take those tough decisions, where those decisions were not possible for different reasons in the past. Today, the government can take, whether these are these foreign trade agreements, whether these are imposing these anti-dumping duties to protect the domestic industry. The government can take those decisions. The global market would not see, or globally we will not be seen as doing something which is fundamentally wrong. So I think from that perspective, the government, if the government takes those steps, it ultimately helps my MSME sector. This demand or consumption or the businesses will certainly be back on track. Imagine you sitting, Aditya, in home for 6 months or a year. The moment you will get an opportunity to go out, when you would feel that, you know, it's safe to go out with your kids, you would do everything which you have not done in those 12 months. So
you're seeing a one-time big jump as well at that, just as a huge
consumption which happens with respect to the white goods or jewelry or apparels and so on and so forth will all come back to normal, because there will suddenly be surge in demand which will happen, because people are waiting for that day to happen. But of course, people do not fundamentally want to take the risk as of now. So I think the bounce back of the economy will certainly happen. Will the normal growth trajectory be reached within the reasonable time? Time is a factor, but certainly I think next financial year is where we will be able to reach out to the last year's level. This is what I feel. Certainly 21-22 will be a much better year. So I'm sure that the year gone by, not this financial year, the previous year, we will be certainly able to match, because the consumption will increase. The real estate will bounce back. The real estate bouncing back, all other sectors come back.
Well taken. So
last point which I want to make, Aditya, is on this expected unemployment, which is estimated to be about 12.2 crores because of this lockdown. I think a lot of youth, and we know that Indian population, 2/3 of the population is very young. It is less than 35 years old. And if there is a job loss in terms of 12.2 crores, and that significant job loss is with respect to the population, which is in the age group of between 25 to 35, I think this is that demographic profile which can still take the risk today. And believe me or not, this will get a good opportunity for them to basically analyze that what exactly they need to do in the rest of their career. So I think even that should be looked with a positive bent.
Well, very well taken. We are running out of time, so I will just try to quickly summarize. Everybody, I have posted the speed networking session link next. So we will be moving from here. So we will all leave this Zoom meeting and we will move on to the next one, where we will all have one-on-one introductions. Every time we've tried this in person, it is the #1 most voted that let's do it again CII event. Hopefully we can recreate that in a virtual environment. So I've sent the link. Please do join that. I would take this moment to thank all our panelists. Thank you so much for sparing all your time. Thank you for the very honest and frank discussion. You know, normally we see everybody's on a PR mission, so they try to sugarcoat things and they don't really go in depth. And this is why I love having such eminent people here. They speak their minds, they're honest, they feel that they can really share. Thank you so much for the audience for spending this 2 hours with us. Hopefully some of it was useful to you. We know you have lots of webinars to attend, but we are very glad to have had you for here. Thanks to our wonderful audience on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, all the hundreds of people who came in there. My apologies, we couldn't get through to everybody's questions. We did try to pick up some of the larger themes in this. But my key takeaway so far is that I think there is a lot of optimism. I think there is a lot of a growth potential. We can only go up from here, it seems. But I also take the key takeaway that we fundamentally need a lot of leadership in this country right now. And we have no shortage of leaders, but we really need for many of them all across the country at the state level, at the business level, to step up, to really say that, look, I am going to provide the level of leadership, clear-headedness that is needed for the country to take forward. I think COVID-19 showed us both examples of great leaders, an example of people who just fizzled out. And that sort of showed, and that reflects on the on-ground issues we are facing today. I can only hope that in the next 3 to 6 months, all of our leaders are able to step up. All of them are able to take the quick, needed decisions to get India back on track. Because very clearly, I think we've heard from all of our panelists that there is no shortage of low-hanging fruit. There is no shortage of reforms that can be done to quickly kickstart the economy. And I think several leaders in the last 3 months have also shown that by really taking this as a bold step personally, they are able to really push for a growth story that is unparalleled. And so I leave it there, and I look forward to seeing you all in 5 minutes at our speed networking event. I am super excited. Thank you all once again.